Hello, everyone. We have an amazing show for you this week. T Omega creates a wind turbine that looks like a Ferris wheel, and then GE gets an injunction against them by Siemens Gamesa.
We talk about electrifying highways to charge electric vehicles, and with a specific focus on heavy haul trucks.
And then finally, we're going to talk about my favorite topic, a small vertical axis wind turbine that looks pretty and doesn't generate any electricity.
Hey, everybody. If you're a frequent listener to this podcast, please take a moment and give us a 5-star rating on this podcast platform. It makes a big difference to us, and it allows our podcast to be played in new places. And to subscribe to our weekly newsletter, Uptime Tech News, which can be found by just Googling Uptime Tech News, and you'll go right to it. I'm Alan Hall, president of WeatherGuard Lightning Tech, and I'm here with my good friend and blade expert, Rosemary Barnes, and my good friend from Wind Power Lab, Joel Saxum. And this is the Uptime Wind Energy Podcast. Okay, first up, a Boston startup, T Omega Wind, says its model tested a unique floating wind turbine design. So, Rosemary, it looks like two triangles side by side, and in between those triangles is a 3-bladed wind turbine. So it resembles a sort of a Ferris wheel design. And T Omega is interested in this design because they think it takes a lot less materials to build it. It's a lot simpler to build. And you don't have complicated bearing structures to support the spinning wind turbine blades. The group is out of Northeastern, which is a college in Boston. But they're saying like their sweet spots can be like 7 to 8 megawatts, and that the amount of sort of energy and cost to build the thing is going to be like a fraction of what it takes to build a 7 to 8 megawatt turbine right now, just because of the difference in design. They're using simpler design techniques, things that are thinner walls, steel tubes, everything's lighter. It basically just floats on top of the waves. It doesn't have a counterweight at the bottom like the standard horizontal axis wind turbines do. But they are getting money. They got funded. And pre-show, we were just talking about renewable energy companies in Boston getting funded, and this is another one of those. They've received $256,000 from the U.S. National Science Foundation Small Business Technology Transfer, so STTR is what we call it in the United States, for their R&D work and their groundbreaking floating wind turbine. Now, first off, does this make sense, this sort of basic Ferris wheel type design?
I like it structurally. I think they're going to struggle aerodynamically, and then the aerodynamic struggles are going to cause structural struggles. So because, normally the reason why a normal wind turbine has its rotor upwind of the tower is because every time, if you put it on the other side, the downwind side, then every time that the blade passes the tower, its wind is interrupted. And so, the blade bends away from the wind. And then when the wind is all of a sudden removed, then it bends back suddenly. And then, so you've got this every single time that a blade passes the tower, it's all of a sudden flicking back and forth. And that's really, really challenging to deal with. And so, like back in the 90s, plenty of people had downwind rotors because there's some advantages to that too. The blades can never hit the tower if that's the way you operate it. But pretty much everyone realized that on balance, it's a lot easier to get these things to survive, especially the blades and the bearings as well, to survive if you have the upwind design. So this doesn't have that. And I note that they've just done a lab test, like a wave pool test of something that looks fairly similar to the drawings that they have shown of it out in operation in the open ocean. So they know something, but they definitely don't yet know anything about how that dynamic behavior is going to go. So I would definitely not put any weight in their cost projections at this point, because it's very easy to say your design's going to be cheap when you only know about the advantages and you haven't had a chance to learn about the disadvantages yet and all of the expensive solutions that you have to come up with to get around all of the problems that come up because you're doing something differently. So early days.
Is it a design that's already been looked at already? The basic concept, has it been looked at before?
I haven't seen it, but I would struggle to. It's not a brainwave. It's we make other things like you mentioned, Ferris wheel. There's plenty of things that we make with that structure. So I would expect that it has been thought of before. But I've never seen anyone develop it as far as they have.
Joel, is there a real need for a wind turbine that is that less expensive? Because they're talking about 30% of the price of a conventional design and maybe about 20% of the weight. 30% would mean that right now wind turbines are about $1 million per megawatt, so they'd be at $300,000 per megawatt. That seems artificially low somehow. Does that seem even plausible?
Yeah, I think when you start talking who will take the risk on putting these offshore in a grand scale, right? And the megawatt numbers you're talking about, those are onshore numbers as well, right? Offshore,
I think they're offshore numbers.
The million a megawatt is usually what we look at for onshore.
Well, that's okay. Yeah, you're totally right about that. Right. There's not really good published numbers for offshore wind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So third, now thinking about a new radical way to design something and do something, 30% of the cost of a conventional design, that's enough to get someone to turn ahead, right? To 30%. Well, that's a big change, right? I don't know if they've done enough due diligence in the design to get someone to put enough money in them to go forward. $256,000 grant sure isn't going to do it, right? $256,000 for R&D level engineering. If this is that's just going to get a couple more engineers, 6 more months to do some more CAD designs. That's not going to do anything for.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if the test that they did in the lab test they did, they could do that part of the project for less than that much money.
Ballpark me a number. What do you think it'd take to build a 7 to 8 megawatt machine starting from nothing, all in,
and install it offshore
in the factory? And get it offshore.
Fixed or floating?
Floating
for, are you talking like complete ground up design to offshore at a 7 to 8
the janitor
megawatt?
to the CEO, getting a company established, getting a building, getting a factory, getting it certified? I guess certified.
5 to 700 million probably.
Oh, I think you're in billions.
Yeah,
and in today's dollars.
Yeah.
I'd be okay to work on a project like that if they had a billion, but for much less, I would expect them not to succeed. But you don't need all that up front as well. You can get a little, especially if they're smart and they, de-risk key parts of the technology onshore before they move offshore. Because, this dynamic loading thing, for example, that's just the most obvious technical risk when I look at it. There's no reason to build something and drag it offshore and pay for ships and stuff every time something goes wrong, probably every half hour at first. So I think if you would build a smaller version onshore, then you can make your development a lot cheaper and maybe entice investors to give you more of the big numbers that you need to get it offshore.
Do an onshore test like you're saying, Rosemary, and then have a goal of selling to someone that already exists in the marketplace. I think that's what in my opinion, that's what a lot of these startups that are coming up with all these new designs should be shooting for. They shouldn't be shooting for, we're going to go and install 10,000 of these, and by 2030, they should say by 2025, we'd like to sell this company and this idea to Vestas or Siemens or whoever.
It'll be challenging for them though. It's hard to see how much of it can really be just slotted into an existing design. Like, you would need to redesign, obviously. I don't know. Now you've got to have 2 attachment points. So your whole nacelle hub, all the bearings, and then the blade structure. Like the aerodynamic design for the blade might be able to be similar, but the structure of the blade will have to be. It's got very different requirements, so that won't be the same either. I can't see a lot of reason for an existing OEM to buy this. I think you would. It does need to kind of start from scratch.
I'm just watching some of the videos and stuff on my other screen here of them, and I'm thinking about some of the like CFD analysis things that I've worked on in offshore subsea things. So now I'm looking at, instead of having one tower, of course, when we have one tower, normally it's always a cylindrical tower and that's it, or close to it, right? And there's not a whole lot that you can do to curtail like VIVs, like vortex induced vibration or anything. Like you can't really add things to it to make it aerodynamically so the wind will flow around it.
Right.
But with four pillars on this design they have, it almost seems like you might have more flexibility to make those pillars more aerodynamically neutral, so that it wouldn't affect the wake of, or not the wake, but the pressure of when the blades come. I'm not saying this correctly.
Make them into an airfoil, basically.
Yeah, make the struts into an airfoil so that they're aerodynamically neutral, so it doesn't affect the loads on the blades as they come around.
Currently, they're square.
Is that doable with this design?
If you look at the square cross sections.
And that's what I'm looking. That's kind of what.
They haven't had that. They haven't got as far in their thinking as you have on that problem. But that's okay. It's early days and they're trying it out. It's cool. It's fine. The cost projections, though, I mean, just because you can reduce mass to 30% does not mean you reduce cost. You're reducing mass from the tower and the floating structure. So I don't think that you can really extrapolate that to be a whole of system cost reduction. I mean, you're still going to need the generator is not going to be any cheaper. The blades will be more expensive. The control system will still cost the same. Power connection will still cost the same. Like, it's nice to use mass as a kind of a substitute for cost in really fixed, specific, isolated sections. You definitely can't do it at a whole of turbine level. So I think that's pretty misleading that even in their best case, that there are cost models out there from NREL and Sandia and stuff that you can use if you wanted to get an idea for how much of the cost goes to the tower and the floating structure. But it's definitely not going to be a 70% cost reduction just because they've made those components cheaper, lighter. I mean,
I've got another one for you, Rosemary. As I'm watching again, I'm watching the GIF image of their pool testing. So now I'm thinking they've said we can withstand a 100-foot wave in some of these things, and I think a lot of that's due to the fact that they've lightened up the structure, right? So it can actually float easier. But now when I look at it, and I'm thinking 7 to 8 megawatt system, your 80, 90 meter blades. Now you've introduced a whole bunch of other dynamic loads to this thing because the structure's lighter and it can move like this.
Yeah.
Now the blades are going to be up and down and left and right, and that's those dynamic loads on composite structures, as we all know, could be brutal.
They've got a good idea and they've got a lot to learn because they're doing something so different. They can't assume that they're not going to have new problems. They will have brand new problems that goes along with a brand new technology. So the more that you deviate from the norm, the more special new problems that you get to experience for the first time. So definitely wish them good luck. And they're just at the start of I guess they're not right at the start, but they're closer to the start than the end of their journey.
Lightning is an act of God, but lightning damage is not. Actually, it's very predictable and very preventable. Strike Tape is a lightning protection system upgrade for wind turbines made by WeatherGuard. It dramatically improves the effectiveness of the factory LPS so you can stop worrying about lightning damage. Visit weatherguardwind.com to learn more, read a case study, and schedule a call today.
Siemens Gamesa got an injunction from a judge that prohibits GE from selling wind turbines with their special bearing support structure that has been patented by Siemens Gamesa. That's a big problem for GE. So essentially, it shuts them down from sales of offshore wind in the United States until they either remove that design or figure out something contractually with Siemens Gamesa. And it doesn't look like Siemens Gamesa is going to allow them to do that. So the injunction came after a number of months. I think that the initial court case was sort of settled the judge came down in June, and now they're going back and forth. But the U.S. district judge prohibited GE from selling any more of these wind turbines, except for 2 cases. And I think this is the interesting piece. They're going to allow GE to make wind turbines for Vineyard Wind and Ocean Wind, so off the coast of Massachusetts, off the coast of New Jersey, and they're going to charge GE $30,000 per megawatt per turbine. So for the Vineyard Wind project, that's about $24 million of a hit financially to GE. So the judge looked at the state's arguments that we need these wind turbines because climate change is such a public problem that it overrides Siemens' ownership of this patent. So the public interest came above the private interest, which is weird. That doesn't happen very often. So I think it set a new standard, weirdly enough, this one patent case, in which, by the way, Siemens is not even using this design, which is a weird thing. They patent this thing, they're not even using it. GE's using it, evidently, and Siemens isn't even using it. That's one of the arguments GE is using, like, why are you sticking us? And Siemens isn't even using the thing. But it creates a new standard that the public impact of a design not being used may override the patent holder's ownership. Ooh, that doesn't feel right. And maybe it's a little more nuanced than that. I know Siemens had said earlier that they were willing to let GE build these 2-site wind turbines because, really, what are you going to do? You look like the bad guy if you do that. But GE's going to appeal. GE's saying they're going to appeal that decision and see if they can get it back to, basically try to get it back to zero again, to say they didn't infringe. I'm not sure they're going to be able to do that. It's going to be really hard to do. And you may have to take that all the way up to the Supreme Court if you really want to fight this thing out. So 2 big things, right? You got this legal framework now in which the public interest can override a patent holder's interest. And GE is going to be essentially off of the playing field in U.S. offshore wind until they can redesign this bearing support, which would at least knock them back 3-4 years, I'm guessing, to get that all undone and redesigned and put back in. So that's when all the action is happening in the United States. This is a huge impact for GE, unless something has been going on behind the scenes where GE has been redesigning this thing while they're in court. I doubt that's the case. Rosemary, you worked with GE for a number of years. How big of a injunction? How big of this is this injunction in terms of GE, renewable business?
I mean, definitely, if they can't sell this product moving forward, that's a huge big deal because so far the Haliade project has primarily cost them money, and they haven't yet got to the part where they're selling a lot of them and they recoup that. So that would be devastating for them, I would imagine. And it would take, if they knew about this at the start, they would never have designed it like that. It would have been fine. The turbine would have ended up roughly the same cost, probably exactly the same cost, no problem. But to start again is going to be quite hard, or it's going to be expensive and possibly time consuming. So that's bad. But I think that the impact, it sounds like, extends far beyond just GE, because if all of these big wind turbine manufacturers and any other company that has a lot of know-how, intellectual property that's part of the value of their company, they all have a strategy for developing IP. And I had things of ideas of mine patented or apply for patent applications that we never intended to use, that I thought was stupid idea, and I would never do it that way because we'd found a better one. But they go through to the effort and the expense of patenting them anyway, precisely for this kind of outcome that you've had the idea, you've developed the IP, about it, we might as well get a patent on it, and if somebody else does it, then we can earn some money that way. And they get royalty payments for a few good ideas. So if they're really going to just say, well, it doesn't matter that Siemens Gamesa rightfully owns the IP because the public really wants it, that would render everybody's strategy incorrect. And I mean, you got to change the law. You can't just decide not to enforce it. Can you? It just seems really out there to me, even though I can see that it's better for the planet and the public and everything. Yeah. But you also, I think they should change the law first and then,
Rosemary,
and then start implementing the new law. Yeah.
Is it really a valid argument? Is who's it protecting? It's not really protecting GE as much as it's protecting Vineyard Wind and Ørsted and Ocean Wind. That's who it's protecting, because they're the ones who are really at risk. If GE doesn't sell a turbine it theoretically had a booking for, okay. Right, those wind turbines are kind of in process, so they haven't expended all the money. Who it's really protecting are the operators in this scenario, right?
Yeah, but the operators should have a clause in their contract that says force majeure. We're putting in, Siemens like a 11 megawatts, 200 DDs or something. Right. They'll have that in there.
Joel, you're right about that. I think the issue with that is that you have to go back and redo your applications again with the federal government and go through the evaluation again, which is one of the initial constraints when you make an application and you're actually applying to bid on the lease, is that you have to define all that stuff up front and you get initial blessing on it. Yeah, we're going to use GE turbines. Okay, fine. I'm not sure why that matters. Is there Rosemary, is there any real difference, or Joel, is there any real difference between the turbines? Why should it matter?
Oh, they'll be a dramatically different size. So I think it does matter, but I mean, they're going to go smaller and it matters. I don't think it matters that much. I'm just surprised that they can't, I would have thought a compromise on the royalty payments to something manageable would be the right course of action. And I mean, there's plenty of OEMs paying other OEMs royalties for design aspects that they want to use. I would like to see Siemens Gamesa and GE reach something like that here, and I'm surprised that they can't, because it's not something critical that's going to, it's not an insurmountable obstacle to find a new way to, design around this patent. So Siemens Gamesa should be, I would have thought, interested in, trying to make the royalty payment that they'll accept low enough that GE are willing to pay it for the, the amount of time that it takes them to redevelop, the next version. But maybe their plan is to just bankrupt GE, make sure that they never sell another offshore wind turbine. And in that case, that would be very sad, because there aren't that many of them, of these big ones out there. There are so many gigawatts of offshore wind turbines in the pipeline all around the world. There's a few other manufacturers with similar designs, but they're far behind. The 14, 15, 16 megawatt turbines from other manufacturers are behind the GE one. So it'll be bad for the planet if they can't reach an agreement.
Well, I'm thinking where it comes to is really there would be a political nightmare if they didn't let these two wind farms go forward with these. So the odd thing to me is that they're going to let two of them, but then stop it after that. That to me shouts politics. Because as we have just laid out this 30 gigawatt goal by 2030 offshore wind, and then the first wind farms are at scale that you're going to put in, there's a huge problem with, and they get delayed years, that would be a political travesty, right? It would be a nightmare. So like in the US, we regularly use the term eminent domain, right? For what's better for the public can take from the private. But usually that's not reserved for IP or anything like that. That's usually reserved for cutting a corner on a highway and we got to take a little bit of land from a farmer or something of that sort.
It's a government use thing.
It can be eminent domain can be used privately as well.
It has been, yeah.
Yeah, because I was on a project once a while back where we took a whole neighborhood to expand a runway at O'Hare Airport. That's not government. Right. So this is the same thing as what's in better. Security.
It sort of is. Right? Yeah. It's nebulous. It's kind of, not well defined.
But what's in the better interest of the public? I think if you really weigh it, it's the political play of, man, the first wind farm we have a huge problem on and we can't move forward with it. Well, that's tough. Right. But I mean, you
see where Siemens Gamesa is coming from, and I'll play the Siemens Gamesa part of this is hey, it's a really tough marketplace right now. We're not making a lot of money. Offshore is a potential huge growth market. If I can eliminate one of the players in one of the wealthiest markets in the world, I will probably do that. And if it's only a 2 to 3 year delta in which the GE is going to be behind, I'll make all of my money then and be happy with it. So yes, I will stick it to GE, and I will look like the bad guy. I'll give them a little bit of a break so I don't cause a political problem with the administration at the moment, which is what they did. And then just sit back and take the orders. And
but you think about that exactly what happened. Now step into the developer shoes. On Tuesday at Sunrise Wind Farm, they just sold 84 11 gigawatt offshore turbines, right? So the orders will roll in, because anybody that's like, we're thinking between GE and Vestas, or we're thinking between GE and Siemens. Well, sorry, GE's off the table now, right? Because that's too risky.
Right. And one of the constraints of the injunction is when GE talks to a potential customer, they must provide the potential customer a copy of the injunction. So they're perp walking GE in front of every customer.
Brutal.
That's brutal. Like, come on, you can't Google that. Do you need GE to do that? Really? Come on. Yeah. That doesn't.
I wouldn't want to be a sales guy for GE.
No, right? Because they have to do this thing, right? And the customers know they have to do it too. It just, that to me seems more of a shaming event than anything legal wise. Come on.
Do you think that they took it this far, or that it's come to what it is? Because I think originally, wasn't this like GE had sued Siemens Gamesa?
Yeah, they sued
and
one
then
another.
Siemens Gamesa was like, we're like, you know what? No, like, we're going to come back and sue you for this.
Yeah,
like there was something beforehand that played in there, so that's kind of like a tit for tat kind of thing.
But this, as Rosemary has pointed out, the public's interest in this is weirdly at the forefront, and it will change the way courts think about these things. If I had made a knick-knack, I patented a new whiz-bang pencil. If someone stole it from me, the best thing I'm going to do is to get them to stop, right? And they're not going to work out some agreement for the public interest. This is not a thing. The courts will never do that. Yeah. But this is, you touch the third rail of politics right now, which is renewable energy in an inflationary economy and a constraint where the president has made promises. That's a tough one for anybody to be in the middle of. And GE knows full well what the ramifications of those things are. I just don't know if it's going to come to a conclusion. And maybe this is the Siemens play, is there's only a certain amount of time here. You got till 2030. So a couple of years at a head start will make a huge difference. So you can be a bad guy for 12 months, maybe 2 years. And then, okay, no, GE, you can use it. Sure. We'll charge you $100,000 for the license and off you go. They could do that too. And so there's a lot of give and take and nuance. And that's where it's going to get really combative, because I think GE is willing to go to the mat because it's such a huge profit center for them. And it's in their backyard that they have to fight it. And they should, in my opinion, they should fight it to see if you can get to Rosemary's position, which is some sort of mutual agreement and a payment so they can move on. Because I think GE has been playing the send me some money and we're cool game for a long time, but Siemens is not playing that, not yet.
Yeah, we should track and kind of watch as these all the lease sales that have happened, what kind of orders start flowing in, and just kind of start putting that information together so we can watch down the coast what it looks like.
Right. I'm interested.
Vestas has to be licking their chops too.
Oh, sure.
V264s as far as the eye can see.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Well, and I think in the political landscape, again, because energy is politics, the constraint that the administration put on itself, where they're trying to have more American components in the wind turbines, for sure, and manufacturing in the United States, that one's going to be hard when they're all non-U.S. companies that are involved on the offshore wind. That one's going to be hard to swallow, right? So you would think that you would think, this is my opinion, I think that the administration would be involved somewhere in the negotiation here, much like they're negotiating with the train unions and the longshoremen right now. You think that they'd be at the table saying, all right, hey, Siemens, why don't you come to the White House? Hey, GE, why don't you come to the White House? And we're going to negotiate this thing out, everybody.
Yeah,
we're going to come out smiling.
Was it Obama who did like the beer summit or whatever it was?
Yes, they got a beer summit.
I think that was big. Yeah, like, come on, let's talk about this.
Let's talk this over. That would probably be the best outcome. So, Rosemary, Joel and I vote for a beer summit. What do you think?
Sounds good to me.
Ping Monitor is a continuous blade monitoring system which allows wind farm operators to stay ahead of maintenance. Wind techs can often hear damaged blades from the ground, but they can't continuously monitor all the turbines. They also can't calculate how bad the damage is or how fast it's propagating based on sound, but Ping can. Ping's acoustic system is being used on over 600 turbines worldwide. It allows operators to discover damage before it gets expensive and prioritize maintenance needs across their fleet, and it pays for itself the first time it identifies serious damage or saves you from doing an unnecessary visual inspection. Stop flying blind out there. Get Ping's ears on your turbines. Learn more at pingmonitor.co.
Well, if you've watched YouTube recently, you have noticed that Rosemary's been doing a number of videos on electric vehicles. And she actually took a cross-country tour of Australia with varying levels of success, mostly to do with recharging of the vehicle. That's a big problem. In the States and in Australia, charging a vehicle can be rather a long, drawn-out process. But there is a couple of developments in the United States where they're talking about putting what I think to be coils in the ground to provide charging to vehicles as they drive over them. And down in Utah, there's a firm that's looking at electrifying a part of the Pennsylvania-Ohio border and then up near Detroit. And there's another project that's going on around Walt Disney World in Florida, where they're providing a way for electric vehicles to be charged as they're driving, such that if you think about it, and I think Rosemary had raised a good point about this in one of her videos, that how do you pay for the roads? How do you pay for everything else? And in the United States, we pay with the gas tax. Well, once you turn electric, what do? Well, maybe the state, quote unquote, or the power company starts selling you electricity as you drive. So as you're driving along, you just got a rolling tab. You just see the dollars on your Tesla screen keep increasing as you're charging as you go along. And initially I thought, oh, okay, this is crazy, right? So you'd have to electrify a substantial amount of the roads. But I don't think they're necessarily aiming for vehicles, passenger vehicles. They're looking to do tractor trailers, long haul trucks. The batteries are impressive. And you can imagine how long it takes to charge up Rosemary's electric vehicle versus a tractor trailer. It could take a long time to get to full charge. So do you need to have something in the road to charge these vehicles up? Because if they're making a 8 or 10 hour run, it's kind of hard to do. Does this make sense?
I think when I looked at the trucks this was like a year or two ago, because it's been an ongoing process, just like the Cybertruck, right? They've been playing around with it for a long time. They had a 500 or 600 mile range, which is a little bit short of what a semi is right now. Semis right now in the U.S. at least, lorries elsewhere, whatever you want to call them. Loaded and going across the plains, you might be getting 3, 4. If you're really lucky, or you got a tailwind, 5.5 miles a gallon. So if you kind of equate that back, I mean, that's a lot of fuel you're burning. So, and if those batteries, now we think about those batteries going 500 and 600 miles, pulling, up to 80,000 pounds or whatever behind them.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, the battery packs themselves weigh 10,000 pounds. Like they're ridiculous. So the idea that you could charge, you'd have to have charging hubs. And we now, like with Rosemary's trip across, Australia, and I've read and watched recent things of people doing the same thing in the States. If they can get to the level 3 chargers where they're like, oh, this is great, it's really quick, but that battery's, the size of my table. a level 3 charger will still take overnight or more to charge one of those trucks. So you're gonna have to have 3-phase power coming in or something. I don't know, but that's definitely going to be a challenge.
Yeah, how big of a charger would a tractor trailer require compared to a little Tesla 4-door?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen people talk about megawatt chargers, to get fast charging of trucks, and who knows if that's going to happen. But it is a really interesting kind of part of the transport decarbonisation in a lot of ways. I think it makes the challenges with passenger cars look very quaint almost, it's so cute. You're worried about, 200 kilowatts versus 500 kilowatts or something, like that's adorable. But for trucks, it's going to be a lot more, but it's also, it's a big chunk of the problem. The transport, moving around of stuff that we currently moving around in trucks. That's there's a lot of emissions to be saved by electrifying that. So it's an important problem, and it is one that I talked about. I got an expert on the show. He's an Australian guy, works at Cambridge University, Professor David Sieben, and he came on Engineering with Rosie for a live stream a couple of months ago. And he's actually, most of his career has been about, heavy transportation, starting with, I think, trains back a long time ago. And he's just recently released a white paper on decarbonising trucking in the UK, I think, primarily, although he has looked at how it would work around the world. And they looked at all different kinds of options for decarbonising the industry, and what they came up with is the best way was catenary charging, or I think pantograph is another way to call it. It's like, electric trams. They have the overhead power line and connect to it with an arm. And they found that if you electrify certain corridors of the highway that a lot of trucks go on, that it can have a payback period as short as 18 months, apparently.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so the economics work out. I came away with the impression that the hardest part of it is just it's a really huge upfront cost, and then you've got some standardization issues. Who pays for it, and how do they recoup their investment? And so I can see it much more likely to work in Europe than in the US or Australia, just because culturally it seems like they're more prepared for governments to, you spend a lot of money up front to make something that's going to work pay itself back over the years. And then you combine these big hubs with then the local deliveries are just regular electric trucks that only, need to go 100, 200, 300 Ks between charges, and it can kind of all work like that. But one of the hardest things is going to be to get standardization, because, if you've got some company that's working on wireless charging over, electrified roads, that's not going to be compatible with overhead charging that, someone else is working on. And so, again, I think easier to do in Europe, where they're much more willing to force companies to, adopt standards. I think Europe is about to be forcing iPhones to change over to the USB-C because they're, the compatibility is mandatory there. So I can see it happening there.
That's
more than
cool.
I can see
I like that one.
elsewhere.
I like that one.
We can't get
That one makes me
the
happy.
electrical plugs to be the same. Why would they have the iPhone plugs the same? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like UK's on 240. Most of the world's on 240. We're on 120.
No, the problem is that you can't just use an iPhone with any random charger. You need a special iPhone charger, and that's not okay in Europe.
Right.
They're not saying. I mean, of course, already iPhone is charging off 220 volts in Europe and Australia. And
right? You go to America and you got this nice, thin, sleek, elegant plug, and then you go to the UK and you got this big.
Do not
big,
get me started
thing.
on
You got the
how terrible the design of the American plugs are, where they're two parallel teeth that just want to fall out of the wall at any opportunity. It's like the Australian ones are angled.
Hotels are you staying at?
you put the plug in and it stays there. Yours are parallel and it's
Because
nothing
it weighs
to stop
5
it. Just
pounds, Rosemary. Where else can it
tilting out.
go? It can't fall out. Gravity won't let it.
They do. They constantly
there's so much
angle
metal
out. So
inside
you've got these like the little edges of the wall
That's so
outlet
you
are
can
just
push your
sitting there
This
exposed
is like
for
first
someone to
world
stick a
problems.
fork on and electrocute themselves. It's why you can only have
That's how you
110
stick-
volts
No.
because you can't. You're constantly touching them, so you have to make it safe to touch.
That's so you can push your couch against it and bend it down. That's what those are
Guilty as
designed. It's more
charged.
room.
220 volts is better. I mean, come on, you can't. You're telling me that America has the best system in place
it does.
there. No.
Yeah, sure we do. Well, what's with the 50 and 60 hertz, right? Can we stick to something that's normal, like 60 hertz? No, we have to have 50. Again, there's no reason for it.
No.
So the whole thing about plugs, you're absolutely right. So this is the discussion they should have about electric vehicles, because they're having it right now on Tesla versus everybody else, right? Tesla has a different plug, and their Tesla chargers are different than everybody else's, and so you have to have this adapter. So are they going to standardize this stuff, or do we just go to magnetic coils in the ground and magnetically couple the energy in so that nobody has a connector, so it's connectorless? It's all wireless charging.
Yeah, but you'll
Is that
still have
where
a
we're
standardization issue because it's not like every wireless charging system works with every other one. You still have to.
True.
If everybody, because so here's one for you that most people don't understand, and I'm sure you guys do. But Wi-Fi, right? Wi-Fi is not a thing; it's a protocol.
Yeah.
Right.
Bluetooth.
So it's a protocol so that everything can communicate with each other. It's not an actual like hook up to the Wi-Fi. It's actually like calling something Kleenex when it's actually a facial tissue. Right. So if we could get a standard, Wi-Fi is the ultimate standardization story of the world, because no matter where you are, it's the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Joe, I think you're probably right
So if we
about
could
that.
get
I
them to
haven't thought
take
about it
a
in
look
those
at that.
terms. Yeah. I mean, even pencils are different in the UK than America, right? Some of the simplest things are not the same. They drive on the wrong side of the road. We drive on the right side of the road. There's just multiples of unevenness where America has clearly led the way. And yet others have decided.
Did you say wrong side and right side?
No, I actually love the UK, and Australia is pretty cool too. It's just that unless there is some standard that's going to be settled upon, we're going to have this continual problem that it's not interchangeable. So if I want to bring over my British sports car, EV sports car to America, I may not be able to charge it. That's a huge problem, right? My new Jaguar, I can't plug it in somewhere, or it won't work on the roads in America. That's a big issue. And they're going to have to find a way to solve it. And some of these early programs about charging electric vehicles are awesome. But I think Rosemary is probably right here that ultimately it comes down to compatibility. We can figure out all the other details. It's whether it's going to be compatible worldwide or not. That's yet to be
I think
determined.
we're a long way away from worrying about worldwide compatibility. It's compatibility within countries is already a big problem. And I mean, like the Tesla charging network is already opening up to everybody in a lot of parts of Europe. And it could do that because the plug was the same. Whereas to do the same thing in the US, you'll have to physically change all of the plugs over or provide adapters for a long time and then start making Teslas with a different, shape hole to shove the plug into. So, I think that it's like, it's better to have standardization. I do think that the European system is better, but it does interfere with the, American competitive environment that allows companies a lot of freedom and allows them to get the advantage, which gives the incentive to actually bother to develop these things. So it's, it's kind of, it's swings and roundabouts. There's advantages, disadvantages both ways, but it's certainly... definitely going to be a challenge. I mean, how did you get there with, you don't have, it doesn't matter what kind of petrol, what kind of gas powered car you have, you can use the same petrol pump for every single one, right? Like there must be something that stops, one company from from
Diesels.
saying, oh, you need a, different size or a different shape or something. Everybody got on board and made every car compatible with every service station. So I feel like it's within our power to solve this problem. Yeah.
I feel like that was a monopoly at the time, right? Sun Oil Company. Joel, stop me if I'm wrong here, because I probably fell asleep during the history class, but Sun Oil pretty much owned all the oil in America at one point. So they probably decided what that was. And then when they got broken up, all the divisions probably still use the same thing. So maybe what we should do is have Tesla just make all the vehicles and we just be done with it. Maybe there you go. That's the answer. Elon would appreciate that. So would his stock price.
Yes, my stock share portfolio would appreciate that.
Again, not
Rosemary
not
stock
SEC
price.
advice.
Yeah, we do not give investment advice on this show. Absolutely not.
Here's a good one for you there, standardizing those things. The only one that's different is in some passenger vehicles that are diesel in the US, you can't go to the truck ones because the truck ones are like this big, like the big truck ones, and they just don't fit. But I believe that you should have like a square or a triangle hole for the diesel ones, because I have quite a few technician friends that have come over from like the UK or from Europe that are driving rental trucks in the wind industry, and they don't know the difference between, like, okay, I know that the green pump means diesel usually, or in some states the yellow pump means diesel, but they just grab one, and there's a whole lot of them putting diesel fuel in gas trucks.
Are they the same size in the US?
So we should.
Were there different sizes in Australia? So you can put petrol in a diesel car, but you can't put diesel in a petrol car in Australia. I think that's right.
You can do both here.
You can kind of do both. Yeah, it's not easy, but you can do both.
Yeah, right. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
My mom did it once.
Yeah, my dad did it once, but I'm pretty sure he put petrol in a diesel truck that he had borrowed. And yeah, then you have to get it pumped out if you realize soon enough. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Hopefully you realize soon enough.
All right, Rosemary, this is right up your alley. Vertical axis wind turbine, but not the normal vertical axis wind turbine that you complained to me about. This is a cool looking vertical axis wind turbine. It's a flower. It's shaped like a tulip. So it's Flower Turbines, which is now based in Texas. So they chose Lubbock as their home base to make these turbines. And I saw them down in San Antonio, and I saw them. I thought they were cool looking. Now, Rosemary informed me, like, well, they're super inefficient, right? Well, okay, that's probably true. But it doesn't mean they're not cool looking, that they actually fit the decor of the buildings and things that are around. But I think it made a really smart decision. They didn't put their factory in a place that was going to be difficult to establish a company. And they chose Texas, which is probably one of the easiest places to get a company up and rolling. And they chose Lubbock because that's where Texas Tech is. So they can take the resources, the people coming out of Texas Tech who are engineers, and bring them on over. So they have a ready-made engineering system, a technical system to work with in, and it's going ahead. In fact, they sold one of their wind turbines to the band Coldplay, and I know we all love Coldplay, right? So that is pretty cool. That had to be a pretty hard thing to do. So the Coldplay is taking the wind turbine on tour to help reduce the emissions. So I don't know if it's on top of a tour bus or is it set on a pole. I'm not sure what they're doing, but that's a pretty good way of actually introducing your technology to the world, is to hook it up with probably one of the most world famous bands that is out there promoting clean energy. But the capacity of these things is not very big, right? So the largest wind turbine they make is about a 3 to 5 kilowatt machine. So it's not, we're not talking megawatts here, everybody. We're talking kilowatts. So it's more of a a wind turbine for a home or a small business. But Rosemary, why is this not top of the heap in terms of wind turbines for buildings? It seems like it's a really kind of cool looking design.
Yeah, I mean they look. I guess some people would say that they look nicer than a normal wind turbine, but the question I would ask is, do they look nicer than not having anything there at all? Because that's roughly how much electricity that they generate. I mean, Coldplay taking one of these around with them. How big is it? I'm just on the website now. You can get 5 of their small size wind turbines, which have 1 meter high blades. And They make it 6 meters per second wind, which is pretty windy. Definitely above the average of pretty much anywhere people live in the US at a 10-meter height above the ground. You can expect 25 to 50 watts from the set of 5. So, let's say Coldplay are bringing that around and generating 25 watts. I mean, it's not emissions free to drag something like this around with them on tour. I bet if someone did a life cycle analysis, they would find that they're emitting more for having this wind turbine than for not having it. I don't know that that's helpful it might be nice. It makes them feel nice that they're green, but it also kind of makes it seem like this is the kind of scale of solution that we need for the energy transition. And it's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, 25 watts is nothing at all. So yeah, I mean, I don't see a lot of place for turbines like this, a lot of point in them beyond feeling smug that you have a wind turbine on your house for like literally no reason. I did make a whole video about why, I think I called it rooftop renewables. So, why solar power makes a lot of sense on roofs and why wind energy doesn't. And it's basically to do with the wind resource that you're accessing compared to the solar resource that you're accessing. So, solar power is roughly the same intensity whether you're on a roof or in a nearby solar farm, whereas wind energy really depends, the amount of energy in the wind depends on the cube of the wind speed, and the wind is a lot slower close to the ground, and it's a lot slower in urban areas than it is in, in open undeveloped areas. So you end up, with, if you've got half the wind speed, then you end up with 1/8 of the power. And so it's just not cost effective to put wind turbines in places where there's not a good wind resource. And people don't live in places with good wind resources, and they don't want to put their turbine up on a 100 meter tower in their backyard, and their neighbors probably don't want that either. So I do wish that.
Is there a place for small wind, though?
There's a place for small wind.
Didn't we talk about this before?
It's for people who are off grid. They can't or desperately don't want to connect to the electricity grid. So then you can get a lot more reliability from having a combination of wind and solar. It's for people who do live in good wind areas. So, like on the west coast of Jutland in Denmark, there's a lot of farms there that have great wind speeds, and they have, it's so common to see small wind turbines there. And I talked with a few farmers and they absolutely love them because they just are economic, and they're providing pretty reliable power, decent amount. A lot bigger than these ones you're seeing, and they're of the traditional horizontal axis type, or variations on that theme. So they're making twice as much energy for the same swept area as one of these flower ones would. Those are basically the two places. I think because I made this video and I always try my hardest not to be too negative about what I'm talking about, and so I did come up with a bunch of places where I think that small wind or rooftop wind makes sense. And it was those two, for off-grid or where you have a good wind resource. And then also for where you want to look cool and inspire people. That was the other one I came up with. I mean, there's some, nice skyscrapers that have been designed to, funnel wind up to some turbines. And I mean, they look cool. They're cool out there buildings. They're supposed to, promote a vision of the future and inspire people. The primary goal is not to make a lot of electricity. And if Coldplay are honest that their primary goal is not to offset any meaningful amount of their emissions, then maybe that's the same thing. They're letting people know, hey, wind energy exists because maybe people are showing up to these concerts that didn't know that there's energy available in the wind. Maybe there's something there, but
if they
maybe.
If they were serious, they're serious about it, they would play acoustically.
Well, you could count out the Coldplay tour of Australia. That just got scratched off the calendar for sure. That whole week is
if they would get an electric tour bus would be a much better contribution, I would suggest. There would be a lot
You think they're flying it? Do you think they're riding a tour bus, Rosemary? Really? Do you think they're riding around in a
Wouldn't
bus?
you?
We're talking about Coldplay here.
Isn't that a lot nicer than packing everything up and getting on planes every day? If your stops are close enough, I think that's more pleasant.
No.
If I had, if
James Brown set the bar back in the 1970s, and he took a Learjet. Right, James Brown. If the Godfather of Soul is taking a Learjet, then you better be sure that Coldplay is flying from place to place.
Well, if Coldplay are packing
riding an electric bus,
all their gear is on trucks. So
okay, at least the wind turbine is traveling by truck. I hope that that's true, because if they're packing that up to put it on a Learjet, then I would say that's a pretty clear-cut case of greenwashing. I will admit Coldplay is not my favorite band anyway. But
I will admit that Coldplay is awesome and they should come to America. And if they happen to come to Boston, I'm going to go see them. So if you could just cancel the whole Australia tour date and come to the Northeast, where you can sell some tickets, and we think wind turbines are cool.
And if they've got something to say, they can come on the podcast.
They can come on the podcast.
We would love to have them.
And if they want someone that can help them go through their tour emissions and find meaningful ways to reduce that, then I can also help them with that. I help them find someone to do that for them. They may have done that in addition. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. They did that. They went through. They reduced emissions as much as possible, and then added this turbine so that it was, they had something that people would write an article about and talk about, sustainability. Maybe it's okay. I don't know. I don't follow Coldplay in the news, so I didn't know about it until you told me, Alan.
But while they're riding in their electric bus, they need to get on YouTube and watch Engineering with Rosie to kill the time and to learn about renewable energy. Maybe that's what they need to do.
So I would say to share something with the listeners as well. The biggest model that they have, the blades are 16-ish feet high. And that's 3 to 5 kilowatts. So 3 to 5 kilowatts is the size of basically a small gas generator that you see on a construction site or something like that. Or like if we're talking to blade techs around here, the same generator that runs your 360-degree platforms up and down is how much power this thing can create.
Yeah, except that's...
And if you run 2 saws at the same time, so it'll pop the breaker.
Except that's their rated wind speed, but it also says, it's a 5 kilowatt turbine. You can expect 1 kilowatt hour per hour, which makes it sound like they've potentially oversized their generator.
Less.
That's going to do it for this week's Uptime Wind Energy Podcast. Thanks for listening. Please take a moment and give us a 5-star rating on your podcast platform. And be sure to subscribe in the show notes below to the Uptime Tech News, our weekly newsletter, and subscribe to Rosemary's YouTube channel, Engineering with Rosemary. And we'll see you here next week on the Uptime Wind Energy Podcast.